Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started.
Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. I am recording this on a nice Sunday afternoon. My ex's mum is looking after the babs. I've been launching my Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course all day long, doing the emails, doing the social media shit. Also trying to promote all the merchandise for the Calais project. I'm super fucking grateful if you've ordered a t-shirt or a tea towel or a patch. But yeah, I'm not going to talk for long because I've got to go back to the baby soon. And I've recorded quite a in-depth episode about nerve tonics. Sorry, I went on lots of side rants about gut bacteria and the liver and like all the things. But yeah, I hope it is valuable. Again, just a plug that my course is open to enroll. You've heard me bang on about it loads, but like if anything in this episode speaks to you, then please check it out. Like it only opens twice a year, so you've got like a bit of time now to join before it, becomes like unavailable again. And I should promote this more, but I also obviously run this one-to-one clinic, and I've got like a free version with a crew called the Black Flag Herbal Clinic, which is a free clinic for anarchist comrades who want support with their kind of health. But I also see like paying clients like one-to-one. And if this stuff is like really interesting, but you're like, I can't fucking face doing an online course about it, I just want support because I'm fucking struggling, then please reach out. I had like a real flurry of loads of people and like being super fucking overwhelmed. And then I kind of like intentionally stopped promoting it so that I could catch up. Like basically I've only got like 10 hours of like nursery a week. So by choice, I could get more from state, but I want to look after my little one. He's only tiny. So anyway, like if this stuff seems really interesting, but you want support with it, and I suggest anyone experiencing chronic illness or burnout or life debilitating anxiety, like I just strongly encourage folks to reach out for support, then, please get in touch with me. I've got a whole separate little clinic website where it talks about how I work and the rates and the sliding scale and the payment plans and things like that. So yeah, like don't hesitate basically. But yeah, if you want to just keep learning about herbalism, like please check out the Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course. It's super comprehensive and goes into everything I'm talking about in quite a lot of detail. So anyway, I hope you are okay and thanks for listening. All right, so let's talk about nerve tonics. So nerve tonics are herbs which act to tonify, strengthen and restore the proper structure and functioning of the nervous system. And that probably sounds like a bit intimidating, but say for example in the Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course, I go into like a lot of depth around the kind of physiology of the nervous system. So we look at things like nerve cells and nerve fibers and, the brain and neurotransmitters. And like once you have that kind of grounding of what the nervous system means, because I think we think of nervous system and we think of the kind of like emotional aspects of it, like, oh, I'm anxious or stressed. But we often like fail to forget that like the nervous system is literally like its own like physical entity. Like I don't know if people have seen those like funny memes where it's like my whole system is nervous and it's like like a dissected kind of brain and the spinal cord and like all the nerves coming out of it, and it looks like a fucking tree, right? Which is gorgeous. But it's like the nervous system actually does have like very physical manifestations in terms of like cells and the spine and the spinal cord and all of these things. So like nerve tonics are really having some kind of effect like specifically on that system. And I think like they often have like a much broader impact of like it's not actually just the nervous system, but because we use them in a state where someone is like really fucking burnt out and struggling, there's actually always loads of stuff going on. Like there's loads of potential nutritional deficiencies, like the mitochondria, the kind of like energy powerhouses in the cells, like might not be functioning optimally. There's like stuff going on in the digestive system, and obviously the GI system is super connected to the nervous system, and there's all this research around the gut microbiome and how it affects mental health and everything else. So it's like everything is connected to everything, which is fucking great for us, because it means when we work with a plant, we can support multiple systems at once, because you are just more than a collection of systems, right? Like you are a whole person. But yeah, nerve tonics are kind of like incredible allies to, I guess, support the entire body to kind of function better, but with a kind of, I guess, like a focus on the nervous system. And with a focus on someone is very, like kind of burn out nervously, and that's like manifesting in issues that we associate with the nervous system, like anxiety and being in fight or flight and insomnia and like depression, like all of these things that we kind of like associate with the nerves are very supported by nerve tonics. But often, to address those things like anxiety, for example, maybe you just have a B12 deficiency that a supplement can like really fucking help with. Does that make sense? So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that nerve tonics have a really, really, really broad array of potential actions that can be very supportive. And knowing the difference between the different options is like fucking powerful, because you can get really targeted and focused, right? And that's what we go into detail in the course, is like each plant has its own in-depth plant profile, so you can like really work with those nuances of like, okay, when is licorice fantastic for someone with like adrenal issues, and when could it potentially raise someone's blood pressure, and maybe their blood pressure is like a fault line for them in their kind of like nervous system distress, so licorice might not be appropriate. Like it's all about the kind of nuance. But yeah, some of the different medicinal actions that nerve tonics can have include helping address nutritional deficiencies. So for example, like I don't actually profile like nettle in the course as like a nerve tonic, but I am like increasingly working with nettle in my like nutritive kind of energy blends that I often give people who come to me who are like really burnt out or have like chronic fatigue or long COVID or like these kind of chronic issues. Like nettle will have, for example, a lot of vitamins and minerals that can help address those nutritional deficiencies, which can help the nervous system to function better. So a lot of our kind of nerve tonics will often be kind of like rich in those things that we need, like elderberry, for example. Nom, nom, nom. It's so delicious, but it's so full of antioxidants and stuff that are just fucking fab for like a depleted system or any system. So yeah, I always talk about how elderberry is like totally underestimated as a nervine and like a nerve tonic. But yeah, so addressing nutritional deficiencies is like one role. There might actually be a function of that herb in terms of supporting like the actual repair of the kind of like structure of the nervous system. So I'll go into this more in the course, but there's a thing called the myelin sheath, right? Which is this like layer of fat that surrounds all the nerves. And lots of people, their nerves like aren't firing well because they have a deficiency in fat, or that kind of like myelin sheath is like damaged. So they, like the nerves can't like communicate as like effectively. So some herbs actually contribute to kind of the repair of the myelin sheath and the kind of like reproduction of it. So for example, skullcap is just like Virginia skullcap is just fucking amazing at having an affinity with the myelin sheath. So like someone can take a skullcap tea for like several weeks or months, like in the evening, and it will be acting as a kind of sedative nervine, like helping them sleep, but it will also be contributing to like the repair of that myelin sheath, partly because it contains like a lot of like B vitamins. But yeah, like, and so you can be like specifically focused on like, something kind of like super tangible in the nerves, if that makes sense. The other aspect is you might be supporting the HPA axis. So this is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. I can never say pituitary. I don't know if anyone else can say. It's like my sister. She can never say vanilla. It's like really funny. She's like vanilla. Anyway, so the HPA axis is basically the communication from the brain to the nervous system, like to the adrenal glands, which I'll go into this in the course, but like it's kind of like how our brain tells our body to respond to danger by, sending out the stress hormones, sending out the adrenaline and the cortisol. And that there is like a particular kind of like functioning there in terms of like what the adrenals need or what the brain health needs, for example. And so, yeah, you can get herbs that like specifically have an affinity with that kind of access. Like they really like particularly support the adrenal glands, or like, I think this, hate to say it, but this shit is so under researched that like, I think as the years come, we'll get more and more intel around actually what lots of herbs are doing to the adrenals, like in terms of like positive influences. But we know that there's like a handful of herbs that like really kind of like target this kind of HPA axis. And like, I hate to fucking say it, but like a lot of that is from like horrific, violent animal research. For example, I talk about this in the course, like I don't quote studies in the plant profiles where they've like abused and butchered like animals like in that research, but I will kind of like culturally reference something. So for example, in Russia, they did loads of research around like mice and soldiers, and they were looking at kind of like how long a fucking animal could take to basically like collapse with exhaustion, which is like fucking horrific. And that was how they found a lot of the actions of like the kind of ginsengs, like the Siberian ginseng and Korean ginseng and things, was they were tested on animals and could see that they were like extending the ability of that animal to like endure stress, which is like fucking horrific. And then, they tested it on soldiers who were like in like, situations of like hardcore endurance and like, sleep deprived and all of this stuff. And it showed the kind of like effects of these herbs like on that stress response in their body. But all of these studies, A, they're fucking harrowing, but B, they kind of like often like differ from like traditional use of like when a herb is indicated. Oh my god, this is such a side rant, but like for example, like many of these herbs like ashwagandha or the ginsengs like or rhodiola, for example, like they are traditionally used with people who are in states of like really intense kind of debilitation and fatigue, and like their stimulating properties are like very focused. They're definitely not designed to enable people to like kind of like, I don't want to say like abuse their bodies, but enable people to like cope with like situations that are like ultimately leading to like more and more depletion, for example. Anyway, I'm sorry, that was a bit of a side rant, but basically I'm trying to say that like these herbs have a kind of documented effect on this HPA axis. But I think there's like way more herbs and way more interesting research ahead of us that will show us that other herbs have that effect too. But there's a handful of them that are like super well researched because it's like benefited capitalism to like be able to commodify these fucking plants so that they can sell them to, whoever, to like, so that they can fucking keep working at their 8-hour-a-week fucking shit job. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, but yeah, there are lots of herbs that have an affinity with this HPA axis, and we can work with them like skillfully and appropriately. And that is the benefit of doing kind of like further self-education and stuff, because I think it's like very easy when you get into herbalism, and I definitely fell into this trap of like, adaptogens, like they can help with stress, and so you read all about adaptogens and then you take these adaptogens and actually they just enable you to fucking burn out harder because you've coped short term, and they haven't actually supported your nervous system in the way that you've needed, which is to have much more kind of like rest and digest, like parasympathetic time, because that parasympathetic time is when you actually repair and regenerate your body. So anyway, so that's what I talk about a lot in the course, is kind of like, when is it like useful and appropriate to use or like work with these plants, and when is it potentially harmful? But yeah, nerve tonics can also help with like sleep disturbances, for example. So I talk about this more in the kind of like sedative, like nervines kind of category in the course, but I'm going to record a podcast episode like particularly around these like hypnotic sedative plants that can like really aid with sleep. But like a lot of the other like more sort of general nerve tonics can like also kind of aid with addressing patterns of insomnia and things, which is, how they kind of end up in this like sexy nerve tonic category. I've mentioned nutrition already, but they can often provide like antioxidants to aid the immune system. For example, plants like elderberry that I've mentioned, or schizandra. It's like really, really full of like amazing, like huge array of different plant chemicals that is really supportive to different cells. And like, because industrial agriculture is fucking shit, and like buying berries and stuff is like fucking expensive and inaccessible for most people. Like, we are just starving in our cultures of how do we access these amazing, like broad variety of plant chemicals that you would get if you were just foraging, hundreds of different plants every year. So it's a fantastic way of getting these kind of chemicals like into someone's system so that they can, aid in kind of reducing inflammation and supporting the immune system and supporting like repair and regeneration. Like, that's what these kind of tonics are doing. Many nerve tonics can also really help kind of with the production of various kind of like neurotransmitters. So they can like really help with that kind of like, like brain chemistry stuff. For example, like St. John's wort is like super researched in terms of its impact on serotonin. And like, again, I think this is like a super under researched area, which is just going to change like all the time. I was going to go on a side rant about ADHD, but I'm not. But I'm just saying that like, I think that there's going to be more and more interesting stuff coming out around how plants influence like neurotransmitters and how that is connected to like the fucking microbiome in the guts. Like, it's just like eternally fascinating herbalism. Okay, nerve tonics can also often support the liver. And so the liver in our body is like metabolizing like our stress hormones and our kind of environmental demands. And often herbalists, that's somewhere that herbalists will kind of like focus in terms of supporting someone. Like, I've been supporting a client recently with endometriosis and gave them like an inflammation support blend. I can't remember what was in it now, but I've got it written down. But it was definitely like elderberry, schizandra, nettle. And they asked for a refill, and I said, do you need a refill of anything else? Like the pain blends I sent them, like California poppy and cramp bark. And they were like, no, like I don't need the more of the pain blends because I actually haven't been in much pain since taking the inflammation support blend, and my itching has gone down. And itching is often a sign that your liver is kind of unhappy. So anyway, we can support with these nerve tonics to kind of support someone's like organ system that is like potentially struggling the most. And for people in a state of like burnout and depletion, often it is this kind of liver GI stuff that's like really struggling to cope. And that's often because we've had unrelenting levels of stress hormones in our fucking bodies. And often we're hitting a place of burnout because there's been some sort of pattern of, I don't want to say self-neglect because that puts the onus on the person, and often it's like because the person is just trying to survive like unsurvivable difficult things. But there's often a kind of like pattern of like neglect in the sense that someone's maybe been like overworking massively, been in like acute fucking serious hardcore stressful situations for a long time, or like they've had a chronic illness which is just kind of like depleting them over and over and over again. So it's like, often it's kind of like the liver that is this like access option to recovery, because we can support the liver to sort of like eliminate and sort of bioassimilate things that the body needs to like function well and just reduce these kind of levels of inflammation. And because when we have high levels of inflammation, like that's like really fucking with the stress response. I think we think that stress is what triggers the stress response, like, oh, my landlord was a fucking dick, or I had this abusive relationship, or I've got precarious housing, and like all of these like massive external things are major drivers of stress. But there are also other drivers of stress that are like internal, if that makes sense. And that includes things like, like food intolerances, or, a fucking parasite, or some challenging overgrowth in a certain like super dodgy, gnarly bacteria. Like there are also these like internal stresses. And when someone is like extremely inflamed or their immune system is kind of dysregulated, then they're often just like coping with that body's like stress response. And that's why it's so amazing to support the liver. Oh my God, I hope this episode is not alienating people of just this fucking like rants, but I just want to do a good job in talking about why these herbs are fucking amazing and all the options that they give us. Okay, so the next thing is that nerve tonics can often improve circulation, and often they can improve circulation to the head. So for example, Tulsi or vervain or even betony, they're like very indicated for people that get headaches or migraines. And that's often because of a kind of like cerebral circulation challenge, as well as liver issues and states of tension and things like this. But like there are certain nerve tonics that are like really fantastic at kind of aiding that blood flow. And there's also a category of plants called nootropics, which help get blood to the brain so that someone's able to like concentrate better. And again, capitalism's doing its fucking best at trying to like commodify these and put them in like fake coffee blends and all of this shit. But yeah, there are herbs that kind of like offer that to people. Okay, and then I've mentioned the gut bacteria already, but like a number of nerve tonics also have like specific affinity with the gut bacteria and the gut flora. And oh my God, it's such a massive episode to talk about gut bacteria and like mental health, PTSD stuff. But like our microbiome in our bodies massively shapes our kind of mental health and our perceptions of the world and everything else. So when someone is often in a state of like extreme burnout or depletion, you can guarantee that there will be some dysbiosis in their gut. Like there will be some issues around some sort of overgrowth of either like some sort of bacteria or maybe, like some other organism or like a fungal overgrowth. And that will start to like influence someone's kind of like mental health, like often quite severely. I mean, fucking hell, there's like so much research around this. Like there's a book, I'm trying to remember what it was called, but they looked, I'll try and dig it up, but they looked at the gut bacteria of, sorry, trigger warning here, of several people who had killed themselves. And they found like a disturbing trend of like several of them having like quite an extreme parasite connected to cats. And, that might have been a fluke because it was like a really small sample size, but it's such a massive emerging field that we're still trying to understand is just like, what are the relationships between your microbiome and your like mental and physical health? So yeah, a lot of the nerve tonics, I think, do have like a really strong relationship to the guts, like licorice, for example. And I think, or they have like a bitter action, like vervain, for example. Or betony, which I've mentioned, are fantastic nerve tonics, and they're often really signaling to the digestion through this bitter action to, release digestive enzymes and like process food better, and God knows what else is going on down there when you take them. So it's like, yeah, it's just another aspect of fascinating herbal stuff. Nerve tonics can also like directly relieve nerve pain, such as sciatica. Like herbs like St. John's wort have like second to none levels of affinity, for example, with that like hardcore kind of like nerve pain and like repair. And yeah, also like blood sugar. Oh my God, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, lots of nerve tonics can have an effect on the kind of all the like blood sugar stuff, like the insulin, potential insulin resistance, things like this. That can, really be kind of influencing someone's energy and mental health. So basically, there are like so many fucking ways that these amazing plants can help you recover from chronic fucking stress, from burnout, from high levels of depletion, from chronic illness. But yeah, it is a fucking challenge learning about all of them individually and learning about which ones are appropriate and for how long and stuff like this, which is why I go into depth in the Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course about them. So yeah, I'm going to talk about a few of them individually. I don't think I'm going to have the time to go into all of them. maybe I could do like a part 2 or something, but I'm going to talk about a couple of critical ones. Well, not critical ones, like I don't have my favorites. They're all amazing, but basically I've got limited childcare. So I'm just going to go for it and talk about a handful of nerve tonics so that you get a feeling of what this looks like in practice. And yeah, we'll go from there. All right, so let's start with milky oats. But just, I want to say that fucking oats in general are just amazing for the nervous system. I personally eat oats every morning, as does my baby. I don't like that overnight shit. No thanks. You'll probably be like, nah. But yeah, but oats in general are just like fantastic for the nervous system and for the nerve cells. And like there's loads of research around oats and blood sugar and like all of the things. But milky oats are kind of like harvested in that kind of like latexy, like milky stage. If you Google milky oats, you'll see what I mean in a picture. But that's why it's like a fucking ball ache, because you have to harvest them at a specific time. So you can't just like easily make them, if that makes sense. So if you are a grower and you have any spare milky oats, I get through like buckets of it. So anyway, but milky oats, I have found the glycerite fucking incredible, but the tincture is also fantastic. And I'm not like a big alcohol tincture girl, but I do think certain plants like, extract into alcohol much better, which is, like a whole massive thing. But I find even for people who are quite tincture intolerant, that milky oats seems to just go down really well. So they're really kind of fantastic for all sorts of reasons. One of which is they actually contain tryptophan and like different amino acids that often, if someone is having like intense anxiety, for example, they often will have a kind of deficiency. Please don't hate me, vegans. Like I've been vegan for like nearly 25 years, but like people fucking struggle often with having enough protein in their diets, of any diet, of whatever you're eating. But often that kind of like amino acid complexity and balance often goes like quite far, like array. And I hate to say it, but like people often go vegan at a certain stage of their politicization, and then they get kind of like heavily involved in stuff, and then they get very burnt out. And it's normally because they've been throwing themselves at the deep end with loads of chronic stress. But also, I wonder if there is just a connection to just having this kind of like depletion in terms of like nutritional deficiencies and things like B12. Like I've said 100 times, I'm like such a B12 drug dealer in my clinical practice of like, just fucking take B12s. But anyway, so yeah, milky oats contain different vitamins. They also contain vitamin B6. Oh my God. And B6 is like such a massive factor for people with premenstrual tension. Like there's been loads of studies around people with PMT or PMDD where, like their kind of manifestation of PMT is like really fucking extreme, like suicidal levels of like distress. And often, there can be like a vitamin B6 deficiency going on, and like supplements are amazing, but they're often like not absorbed easily, especially if someone's got like gut stuff going on. So yeah, I think milky oats have this like secret B complex amino acid thing going on, which makes them like fucking amazing for the nervous system, as well as just kind of like calming the nervous system. And then like oats in general have a really fantastic kind of impact on kind of like metabolism and like blood sugar stuff, which is like another factor for lots of people. So yeah, milky oats is definitely one of my faves that I put in lots and lots of blends for people recovering from chronic stress. You can also have like oat straw tea, which like contains like many of the same kind of nutrients and is one of the ingredients in my nervous system soother tea. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like one of the teas that nerve nourisher tea, which is one of the teas in my herbal care packages that go out to people experiencing state violence in different ways, like people experiencing repression or supporting someone in prison, things like that. So so milky oats is fucking amazing. Okay, so next up is vervain, and I just put a post on the old Instagram about vervain after I had a really full-on fucking nervous breakdown like several years ago now, before I did my like clinical training and stuff. And yeah, like, I mean, it's a long story if I went into all of that, but like basically vervain was like one of the critical herbs that I worked with like in my recovery. And again, I use vervain a lot with people that are struggling with kind of burnout. And vervain's got this like really wonderful kind of like gentle kind of like I don't want to say sedative, but it is a bit sedating, like this kind of relaxation effect on the nervous system, like kind of this like relaxant nervine, but basically helping us shift into kind of more like parasympathetic kind of rest and digest state. But I find that vervain is like really fantastic where there's like chronic states of tension. And I think a lot of people in states of like intense chronic stress are often very kind of like tense. And I think a lot of like type A workaholic organizer-y types are often like, I will keep going, I will keep going, I will keep going. Like they have that tension and that hyper responsibility, and that often will manifest in like musculoskeletal pain and neck pain and migraines and things like this. And I find that vervain is like really effective at supporting people to like access that more parasympathetic state, but also just to kind of like reduce that tension across like the whole system. And like I mentioned earlier, like vervain has like a real affinity for the liver. And often people who are in that kind of like heat kind of rage state. So on my Instagram post, I shared how, you know, like I was so highly activated. Like it was just like a 2-month PTSD episode of just like intense fucking flashbacks, like extreme anger and rage, like, you know, fucking nightmares, like throwing up. Like I would vomit anytime a friend of mine would call from prison. Like I would physically vomit. Like it was such a like high energy, high activation state compared to when someone, for example, is like seriously depressed, even though vervain is also fantastic in that state too. But I do think because it's got such a cooling kind of cold action, that's what makes it very good for people that have a lot of like heat and activation with that kind of fight or flight. Because, you know, like some people are much more like depleted in the sense of like a kind of shut down, frozen, depressed state, and they benefit from herbs which are kind of like uplifting, like St. John's wort or lemon balm, for example. Whereas I feel like vervain is just, yeah, it just has that kind of like cooling, kind of like dampening, even though it's not like a very damp plant, but it's just got that kind of like chill the fuck out kind of vibe. Do you know what I mean? It's also strongly associated with people with like insomnia. And I think, again, you can get insomnia for all sorts of reasons, like all sorts of nutritional deficiencies, trauma, like all the things. But you can also get insomnia because there is so much like overactivation, like there's so much like anxiety and racing thoughts and yeah, just like fight or flight, like sympathetic energy. And vervain is just like fantastic at kind of supporting people in that state. Like I think, I don't know if people have seen that book, The Ethnobotany of the British Isles, I think it's called, by David Allen and Gabriella Hatfield. I could just be completely making that up, but that's from my memory. But they've looked through like folk records and different kind of like herbal books and all the things to put together this kind of book where they're like documenting kind of traditional knowledge from things that are only recorded rather than like kind of oral history. And I think I could just be fucking pulling this out my ass, but from memory, I think that they talk about how vervain was like associated for people with like quote unquote hysteria, which anyone will know is like a kind of like extremely patriarchal like label put on like feminized people of like basically like PMT or depression because of fucking patriarchy. But like that's what I mean by this like level of fight or flight tension, this kind of hysteria, like heat energy sense. Vervain is like very cooling and calming. It's also just got all these affinities with the nerves in this like nerve tonic sense. So it's one of the herbs used for people struggling with shingles, for example. And I think that's because it has this action on the nervous system, like, and on, you know, the kind of like nerve cells and things and fibers. But it also, you know, fucking back to the microbiome stuff, has a lot of antimicrobial properties. And there's research around vervain, and they've tested it in petri dishes against like various bacteria and stuff, and it actually is like quite an underestimated antimicrobial herb. And maybe that's what's going on. Like, it's a bitter and it's helping our liver and our kind of whole GI tract to function better. But who fucking knows? Maybe the hysteria is because of some fucking gut bacteria that vervain has a selective, targeting response to killing. Like, who fucking knows? Oh my God, I watched such a good webinar the other day about herbal support in terms of the microbiome and which herbs, like, kind of a broad spectrum, just like mash in all the good guys as well as the bad guys, and which ones are a bit more selective and which ones are like prebiotics and help certain bacteria reproduce. And oh my God, it is so fascinating. Maybe I should try and interview some people about this, because I just fucking love it. I've literally got a microscope tattooed on my leg, by the way, from when I was studying like soil microbiology stuff. So yeah, this shit is just like fucking interesting to me. Anyway, but yeah, that's a little bit about vervain. So just wonderful nerve tonic. People who are like super burnt out, debilitated, but also with high levels of activation, I will always go to vervain. It, I think, is like a bit of an emmenagogue and is contraindicated for people in early pregnancy. So, like with any herb that I talk about on the show, like, please research it thoroughly before working with it. The other thing I was going to say about vervain is this affinity with the head. So like often a lot of like headaches and migraines coming from that place of tension and activation, but also coming from this like liver axis. So yeah, vervain's your herb. And also I think has this like traditional response, like traditional use around nightmares, which again is just all nervous system stuff. But yeah, so anyway, that's all about vervain. Right, so the last herb I'm going to talk about in the nerve tonics section is evening primrose. And this is like one of the more kind of like mainstream or like commodified herbs, I would say, in terms of like cultural awareness. And like, for example, you can go into fucking Holland & Barrett and get like evening primrose capsules, for example. But my experience with evening primrose, again, I did like I sound like such a fucking dick, don't I? I said, oh, I post on Instagram. But unfortunately, my livelihood is based on like outreach and encouraging people to join this fucking course so that I can sustain all the solidarity work. So like, forgive me for the social media references, but I did this post on Instagram that was about evening primrose. And sadly, I shared my kind of, I associate evening primrose with my ex-girlfriend Anna and our relationship, and it being quite volatile, not because of them in any way, but because of me. And at the time, my mood being like dramatically affected by premenstrual tension, and like my PMT was fucking terrible because my stress response was like completely out of control in terms of like untreated, unprocessed trauma from like prison and all this stuff in my childhood and all that blah blah. But yeah, like when I kind of broke up with them, I was like super fucking premenstrual and like completely out of control and just spontaneously did it. And then, a few weeks later, they told me, right, I'm going to Rojava where they died, and they never came back, like not even her body. And I just knew that I had to get my fucking PMT like under control because I was just destroying relationships like all around me. And evening primrose was really the herb that I worked with, and you can get like capsules, and I do think the essential fatty acids in evening primrose are what gives it its like nerve tonic action. So I've said loads of times, like our nerves, like, and our nervous system, it needs fat to function, and so many of our kind of like nervous system related problems are because we have a deficiency of fat. I hate to say it, but especially for vegans, like, so you've really got to be on it with like the fucking olive oil and the avocados. And I know they're expensive, but like getting that kind of like nourishing fat into your body, you know, like walnuts and nuts and seeds, like really helps the nervous system to work well. I know lots of people have problems digesting fats, and that is again part of the stuff of how the digestion really affects the nervous system, etc., etc. But yeah, like you can work with like evening primrose capsules, for example, to help address like deficiencies in fatty acids, which will massively improve things like anxiety. But you can also work with evening primrose like as a tincture or as a tea. I've pretty much mostly worked with it as like an alcohol-based tincture. I haven't had the pleasure of trying to make a glycerite yet with evening primrose. But yeah, it's as a tincture, I found it just worked on like so many other levels. So like it does have this kind of like slight sedating action, but not in like a kind of like sedative nervine way, but just in a kind of like general relaxant effect on the nervous system. And it can have like an actually kind of like an antispasmodic action on the digestive system. And I think again, like I think it's working as a nerve tonic through that kind of like GI axis as much as anything. But yeah, the kind of like essential fatty acid content is the thing that is like really transformative for people with all sorts of like hormonal related challenges. And I think that evening primrose again has this like affinity with like the liver, for example. And that is often why a lot of people are struggling with things like depression, other than just, you know, fucking like late stage capitalism and all the fucking trauma and oppression. But like also because our, you know, like detoxification systems and our GI system aren't working well, you know, also because of chronic stress and industrial agriculture and all the things. So evening primrose has this like real affinity with the liver, a bit like vervain. But yeah, the kind of essential fatty acids make it really fantastic for issues like acne, for example, as well. It has an effect, like quite a documented effect on high blood pressure. So, you know, there's all this like cardiovascular affinity as well. And yeah, I think it's also very like cooling in general, but not in a like a cooling bitter way like vervain or betony, but in a kind of like more mucilaginous way. Like evening primrose has actually traditionally been used in like cough syrup and stuff. So anyway, I am going to stop talking now because I've got to go back to the bubs. But I hope this episode has been interesting, and I hope it sparked your interest in potentially working with nerve tonics to help your nervous system. And I hope you can see how it's not just as simple as like, oh, I'm going to take this herb for that. Like this shit gets like quite complicated in terms of like the actions and the chemistry and all of the stuff. And that's why I spent many, many, many months / years learning all this stuff, but many months putting together the Herbalism PTSD and traumatic stress course, because I wanted to communicate this information to people that I was supporting in a way that was like accessible and digestible and not overwhelming. So in the Herbalism and PTSD course, like we go sort of step by step really of looking at the physiology of the nervous system, how it all works, like the different parts, how things are connected. You know, we look at things like nutritional deficiencies relating to PTSD symptoms and how the body expresses distress. And then we go into deep dives, like 32 plants. I like, you know, sometimes it's like over an hour long, me talking about a plant. Okay, a lot of them are a lot less than that. But yeah, like it's comprehensive in terms of you will come away, hopefully, with an understanding of, okay, I'm supporting this person or I'm supporting myself, and this herb may be appropriate because of being in this category, but also because of these specific actions and these affinities. So yeah, so anyway, it's open for enrollment as we speak. As I've mentioned everywhere, it's no one turned away for lack of funds. So please don't think that money is a barrier. I'm aware there's like loads of fucking other barriers, like, you know, childcare and time and energy and all other things, but it's lifetime access. You can work through it as slowly as you need. There is no pressure to like attend things live. You could join now and, you know, start working on it in the summer or next year. But yeah, I think it's like a really fucking useful resource in like understanding all of this stuff. So if it's like sparked your curiosity, please check it out. And I will be back soon later on this week. I'm going to be talking about cardiac nervines, so herbs with an affinity for the cardiovascular system. I'm also going to do like a similar episode about like sedative and like hypnotic nervines, and then we're going to do one about relaxant nervines as well. I mean, no, not relaxant, stimulating nervines. I've already done one about relaxant nervines, which you've hopefully checked out. So anyway, thanks for listening. I hope there's been some value here, and yeah, take care.
Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityApothecary.org/podcast.